What if something in your kitchen has been quietly affecting the human body for thousands of years? Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that shouts for attention, but in a way you would only notice if you slowed down enough to feel it. There's probably a small jar somewhere in your kitchen right now, maybe pushed to the back of a shelf, maybe sitting there so long you barely see it anymore. A deep yellow powder, ordinary, familiar, easy to ignore, and yet long before it became just another spice, people were using it every day, not for flavor alone, but for what seemed to happen inside the body after they took it. In places separated by distance, language, and belief, people kept coming back to it, not because they had laboratories, not because they had modern diagnoses, but because something in the body responded. And now, thousands of years later, science is trying to describe what people seem to recognize long before it had a name: inflammation, digestion, joint discomfort, modern language, trying to explain an older experience. So why did people trust this root before it was ever studied? And what were they feeling that made them keep using it again and again? Think about how your body feels after a heavy meal. Not pain exactly, more like pressure. A slowness that settles in the stomach. A fullness that lingers longer than it should. Or those mornings when your body does not move as easily as you expected. When your joints feel slightly held back, as if they need extra time just to begin. And then there is bloating. That quiet internal tension that builds without warning, leaving you feeling off without knowing how to describe it. Most people treat these things as normal now, but they are not new. People thousands of years ago felt heaviness too, stiffness too, that same sense of internal resistance. The difference is, they did not try to label everything. They paid attention to patterns. What made the body feel lighter? What made movement easier? What made digestion feel more complete? And over time, they kept returning to certain things. Not because they could explain them, but because something kept working, something simple, something repeatable, something the body seemed to accept rather than fight. And that is where this gets interesting. What was so consistent about this root that people trusted it without needing proof? It did not come from a bottle or a lab or anything complicated. It began as a root, pulled from the ground, dried slowly, then ground into a rich golden powder. It has a scent you recognize immediately. Earthy, warm, slightly bitter, and if you have ever touched it, you know it leaves a mark. On your fingers, on cloth, on the surface beneath it, almost as if it refuses to pass through your hands unnoticed. But what makes it even stranger is this: it does not feel powerful in the moment. No sudden rush, no dramatic sensation, no instant change. Just something subtle, something your body does not resist. And that is exactly where people began to notice it. Not in one dramatic moment, but in what slowly started to shift. Digestion felt lighter. Movement felt easier. That quiet heaviness did not seem to stay as long. And across generations, people kept using it, even before they fully understood why, until eventually, it had many names: turmeric, Kurkuma, Haldi, sometimes even Indian saffron, because of its deep golden color. Different names, same root, and somehow, the same kind of response. And if this is the first time you are realizing that something this simple has been quietly used for generations without ever really being explained to you, then you are starting to see what this channel is really about. Not trends, not quick fixes, but the things that were always there, just never pointed out. If this is opening something for you, subscribe, because this is where it starts to go deeper. Long before people tried to measure the body, they learned to observe it, not with machines, with attention. In ancient India, within Ayurvedic traditions, this golden root was not treated as something exotic or rare. That matters. It was not kept at a distance, It was woven into life, used in food, used in routine, used when the body felt out of rhythm, when digestion felt slow, when the body felt swollen, when movement felt less free. This root would quietly return, not as a miracle, as support. And that distinction is important, because it was not used to overpower the body. It was used to help the body return to its own balance. Now move east, into ancient Chinese traditions. Different language, different framework, different way of describing what the body feels. And yet the result kept appearing. When the body felt stuck, when movement inside did not feel smooth, when there was a sense of blockage or stagnation, this same root, or a closely related use of it, kept showing up. Not to control the body, to restore flow. And when you step back, you start to notice something bigger than turmeric itself. Ancient people often saw the body as connected, digestion affecting energy, energy affecting movement, movement affecting the whole feeling of the body, not separate systems, one living system. And in that view, certain plants kept returning, not because they had been proven on paper, but because they fit what people were noticing. Now, if you look toward the world of biblical healing, you will not find turmeric named directly in Scripture. That matters too, because this only works if it stays honest. But what you do find in that world is a repeated trust in plants, oils, resins, balms, and poultices. Hyssop for cleansing, balm for soothing, fig poultices placed on the body. These were not only symbolic acts, they were practical. There was a quiet understanding in the ancient world that the earth carried substances the body could work with. Not every plant, not every root, but some of them. And turmeric belongs to that wider world of ancient plant wisdom, not named in the same texts, but moving in the same direction. A simple root, used repeatedly, because the body seemed to respond. And when very different healing traditions arrive at a similar conclusion, it usually points to something real. But that kind of trust did not begin with certainty. It began the way many old remedies began, with trial, with taste, with reaction. Roots were tested, leaves were chewed, mixtures were tried in small amounts. Some were too strong, some caused discomfort, some were forgotten, but others created a different kind of response. The body did not reject them. It adjusted. Digestion changed, swelling reduced, movement felt easier, and those changes were remembered. First by experience, and then by repetition, then by tradition. Passed from one person to another, from one household to the next, from one generation into another. That is how something simple becomes trusted, not all at once, over time. And turmeric became one of those things. They did not use turmeric the way people often use things now. Not in extreme amounts, not chasing instant results. It was quieter than that, more consistent, more woven into daily life. After meals, when the stomach felt full, heavy, or unsettled, a small amount might be added. Not to dominate the food, just to be present in it. And over time, something became noticeable. That heavy feeling did not remain as long. The pressure did not build in the same way. Digestion felt more complete, not dramatic, but clear enough to repeat. And repetition is what builds trust. But turmeric was not only used internally. That is one of the most surprising parts. In some traditions, this same golden powder was mixed with water, fat, or oil, and applied directly to the body, on swollen areas, on sprains, on places that felt tight, strained, or inflamed, not as an emergency cure, as a steady kind of support. The same root used inside the body was also used outside it, because the goal was not to isolate one symptom. It was to respond to what the body was feeling as a whole. And that is very different from the way many people think now. There was less separation between digestion, swelling, stiffness, and discomfort. It was all connected, and turmeric kept appearing inside that connection. Not because someone had proven it, because people noticed that something shifted when they used it. And that leads to the part ancient people could feel. but could not yet measure. What is this root actually doing inside the body? For most of history, no one needed that question answered. Turmeric was used, felt, trusted. But once science began looking more closely, it started asking a different kind of question. Not what does it feel like, but what is happening inside the body over time. And that is where researchers began isolating one of turmeric's most studied compounds, curcumin, a naturally occurring substance inside the root, not the whole root itself, but one of the key compounds that gives turmeric much of its scientific attention. And when scientists began studying curcumin, they kept returning to one major area: inflammation. Now, inflammation is not automatically bad. It is part of how your body protects itself, repairs tissue, responds to injury and stress. But when inflammatory signaling stays slightly elevated for too long, the body can begin to feel different, not necessarily sick in an obvious way, just burdened. Digestion may feel slower, joints may feel tighter, the body may feel heavier, less fluid, less responsive. Almost like something inside is creating low-level resistance. And this is where curcumin becomes interesting, because it does not appear to work like a blunt force blocker. Instead, it seems to influence some of the pathways and messengers involved in inflammation. You can think of those messengers as internal signals. They help tell the body when to activate a response and when to settle it back down. When those signals remain too active, the body can stay in a subtle state of tension, and over time, you feel that. Curcumin appears to interact with some of those signaling systems. It is also studied for its antioxidant activity, which matters because oxidative stress can add to that same sense of internal strain. So when people say turmeric may support the body, this is part of what they mean. Less irritation in the internal environment, less reactivity in surrounding tissues, a better chance for the system to settle. That does not mean turmeric cures everything. It does not. And it does not mean every person feels the same result. They do not. But it does help explain why ancient descriptions like heaviness, stagnation, slowness, or swelling sound surprisingly close to what modern biology now studies through inflammation and oxidative stress. Different language, same body, and yet even with all of that science, something remains outside the lab, because science can describe the mechanism, but it cannot fully describe the feeling. Your body does not experience compounds as concepts. It experiences responses. It does not know the word curcumin. It does not think in terms like cytokines, oxidative stress, or inflammatory pathways. It knows tension, or ease, resistance, or flow, heaviness, or lightness. And when something supports one of those shifts, the body remembers, not mentally, physically. That is part of why turmeric does not tend to feel foreign. It does not hit the system like something unnatural or shocking. It feels familiar, almost like the body already understands how to work with it. And in a way, that makes sense. Human beings have interacted with plant compounds like this for a very long time, not as isolated extracts at first, but through food, daily use, and repeated exposure. So when you consume something like turmeric, your body is not meeting the idea of plant chemistry for the first time. It is meeting a form of support that human biology has been encountering for generations. And that changes the experience, because instead of forcing a reaction, it allows a response. Slow, subtle, cumulative. The kind of change you do not notice in a single moment, but begin to recognize when something that used to bother you no longer feels the same. And that is probably much closer to how people discovered turmeric in the first place. Not by isolating compounds, by noticing what the body stopped struggling with. So what happens when you stop hearing about it and actually try it? Not all at once, not in one dramatic moment, but in a quiet, steady way over several days. At some point, observation becomes personal. A quiet decision to try it for yourself, not to prove a theory, not to chase a miracle, just to notice a response. Because everything you have heard so far only matters if your own body recognizes it too. And that is where this stops being information and starts becoming experience. Day 1. Probably nothing obvious. And that matters, because the body is not always dramatic when something helps it. Sometimes it simply begins adjusting. You may notice a slight warmth after eating. Not heat, not discomfort. Just a subtle sense that digestion is active, as if something has been gently switched on. Day 2. Still nothing dramatic. But if you pay close attention, that lingering fullness after meals may not sit the same way. Food does not seem to stay heavy for as long. It moves, not faster in an unnatural way, just more smoothly. Easy to miss, unless you are watching for it. Day 3. Now the difference starts to become easier to notice. That stretched, tight feeling in the stomach, the one that quietly builds after eating, may not rise to the same level. There is less internal pressure, less resistance, almost like the body is doing the same work, with less effort. And the shift may not stay limited to digestion. Something begins changing in the way your body holds tension. Day 4. You wake up, and for a brief moment, before your thoughts rush in, you notice how your body feels, not what you think about it, what it actually feels like. And something may be slightly different. Movement feels easier to enter, as if your joints do not need as much time to warm themselves into motion, not loose, not transformed, just a little more cooperative. Day 5. This is often when the pattern becomes clearer, not because of one major breakthrough, because the small changes are repeating. You eat and feel lighter afterward. You move and feel less internal friction. Even your posture can begin to shift slightly, because the body is no longer compensating for the same low-level discomfort, and that creates space. Day 6. Now it becomes less about one specific sensation and more about what is missing. That quiet heaviness, the one you may have stopped questioning, is not as present. Your system feels clearer, not stimulated, not forced, just less burdened. And because of that, energy can feel steadier too, not in spikes, in smoothness. Day 7. By now, you are not analyzing every detail. You simply feel the difference. A kind of internal lightness that is hard to describe to someone else, but easy to recognize once it is there. Digestion feels more complete. Movement feels more natural. The body responds instead of resisting. And the most interesting part is this. It does not feel like something new was added. It feels more like something that had been in the way has slowly stepped aside. And once you feel that, you begin to understand why ancient people trusted certain roots without needing to explain them first. So how were they actually using turmeric? Very simply, most often, it was added to food. A small amount mixed into warm dishes, soups, rice, vegetables, broths. Not enough to overpower the meal, just enough to be part of it. Because the goal was never intensity, it was consistency. In some traditions, it was stirred into warm water or milk, taken slowly, often after food, not as a harsh treatment, as part of a rhythm. And then modern science added one more useful detail. Turmeric on its own is not absorbed especially well, but when it is combined with black pepper, something changes. A compound in black pepper called piperine can increase the body's ability to absorb curcumin, which means more of what is there may actually become available to the body. Ancient people did not explain this chemically, but it is interesting that traditional combinations often moved in that same direction anyway. Not because they knew the molecular language, because they followed what seemed to work. So the takeaway is simple. You do not need extremes. You do not need huge amounts. You need a small amount, used regularly in a form your body can work with, and then you pay attention. That is where the shift begins. But there is one more thing ancient traditions often understood better than modern enthusiasm. Natural does not mean unlimited. Turmeric was not traditionally used as an excuse for excess. It was respected, used in moderate amounts, over time, in a way the body could handle. And that matters now too, because too much can create its own problems. Some people may feel stomach upset, nausea, reflux, irritation, and in higher dose supplement form, turmeric or curcumin may not be appropriate for everyone, especially depending on medications or health conditions. So keep the approach simple. Start small, stay consistent, pay attention. Let the body respond, instead of trying to force a result, because the real strength of this route was never in overwhelming the system, it was in working with it. And that is a very different kind of power. So now, go back to your kitchen for a moment. That small jar, that golden powder. It has not changed, but maybe the way you see it has, because it is no longer just a spice. It is something people return to, again and again, when the body did not feel right, in places that had no reason to agree. The result kept appearing. People used it, watched what happened, and kept coming back to it, not because they were convinced by marketing, not because someone handed them a trend, because their body responded. And that is the part that still matters now, because your body still works the same way. It still reacts, it still adjusts, it still tells you quietly when something is helping, but only if you give it the chance. So here is what I want you to do. The next time you eat, add a small amount of turmeric, or kurkuma, or haldi, however you know it. Nothing extreme, nothing complicated. And then do not overthink it. Just notice. Notice how your stomach feels afterward. Notice how long that heaviness stays. Notice how your body feels the next morning when you start to move. Give it a few days. Let the pattern reveal itself, the same way it revealed itself to people long before us. Because this is not about believing. It is about noticing. Not what you expect to feel, but what actually changes. When you give your body something it seems to recognize, so try it. Not once, for a few days. Pay attention to the small things most people ignore, and then come back here and tell me what shifted. Not what you hoped would happen. What your body actually showed.